Chuck Spence with the Utah PTAC program, and we welcome our clients and others who may be joining us today for this PTAC webinar on proposal pricing strategies. Today we have Patty Campbell and Jim Badley, who are senior consultants with our partners, LSI, and of course we are all part of the PTAC team to help you with your government contracts. Now, we all know that pricing a proposal is a critical part of any submission. And we also know that pricing a proposal is also among one of the most difficult sections to work on when putting together a proposal. So we are pleased to have this pricing strategies and to have two experts in the area in the way of Patty and Jim to help train us on this. So take good notes, ask questions at the end, learn a lot, so that we want you to be successful when you submit your proposal, and we want that pricing and costing to be accurate and to be well informed and to win you the award at the end of the day. So without further ado, we're going to turn the time over to Patty Campbell, who's going to start us off on proposal pricing strategies. Patty?
We're scheduled to go till 11 o'clock, and hopefully we're going to end about 11 o'clock. We may go just a little bit over, so bear with us. Questions can be asked anytime. Please use the chat option. We'll also try to stop after each section and entertain questions. And the contact information for your PTAC regional managers will be available at the conclusion of the webinar. Okay, so today is just to provide information and give you some things to consider. This presentation isn't going to make pricing experts out of any of us, except of course Jim is already an expert. But we're hoping it will help you when responding to federal solicitations. And like I said, we have a lot of information to get through today. So we're going to go a little bit quick. Jim and I, we both have over 30 years of experience with the federal government. But now we're on the other side of the fence. And so we get to see the things that all of you are going through as contractors. And it's been a real eye-opening experience for both of us. And Jim's going to jump in here as he sees fit and make comments as we go. I'm just going to lead us into pricing. We have to kind of set us up before we get to the meat of our presentation today. So there are some initial considerations that are going to affect your price. You got to think about your market conditions, whether your item is a commercial item or a commercial service. Is it widely competitive, or is there a limited pool of competitors? Is it a government-only requirement? And if so, are there available drawings or qualified sources? All of these conditions affect the way you're going to build your pricing model or your pricing strategy. So you have to think about these things before you get to how you're going to price what you're going to price. And the other thing that I want to talk about just a little bit is risks. And the reason for that is last year at the PTAC symposium, a gentleman brought up the risk assessments and asked if we usually do those. And the answer was no, we don't. But there are risk assessment tools and software and services available on the internet. If you're interested in that, you can search that. And also it's something that every business should do before you enter into competing for or replying to a requirement. And so I looked at a few of the white papers which were available out there and just kind of summarized some of the risks that were common to 3 or 4 of those papers that were unique to government contracting. So I'm going to go through those quite quickly here. The first one was not all legitimate business costs incurred are going to be recognized or allowable by the government. And so even though you naturally incur them in performing your business, the government might not recognize them in a cost type contract or if you put them on an invoice. And so the ones that come to mind are entertainment, and gifts that you give clients or your employees, and some attorney fees. So just keep that in mind, that there are some, if you have a firm fixed price, this probably isn't going to enter into it. But if you have a cost type contract, it would probably be a concern. So protest is always a risk. If you're the winner, and there's going to be a delay if there was a protest. And if you're the one who is protesting, you might not win, and there's costs associated with that. And then with certification data or information or rights, that can always get sticky depending on what it is. And so it generally could result in some additional costs for you. You need to look at that. And then dealing with the government, it limits your normal business courtesies. You know, you can't take the contracting officer out to dinner and drinks during source selection or during negotiations like you would a client that you're dealing with. So there's a difference there. And then there's strict contract compliance. It's not always easy. Sometimes the contract is written poorly and complying is very difficult. And then of course there's penalties and sanctions if you don't comply or if you do some things wrong. So those are just some of the biggies, I guess you would say. And then collusion and bidding, excuse me, that happens. The government goes after fraud in a big way, but it still happens. So be aware of it. And also business ethics. If you don't have a code of business ethics, you may have to create one. And I'll tell you about that a little later on in the briefing. And disputes and appeals is the government's preferred method of handling things rather than going the full gambit in the courts. So be aware of that too. Quality assurance, if you don't have a quality assurance program or plan, you have to create one. Labor laws, the Buy American Act or the Service Contract Act, it may require you to pay your employees more than you're paying them now. So be aware that there are laws out there, Davis-Bacon, Service Contract Act, that require you to pay more. And then for material restrictions on foreign materials, China's probably the biggest one lately that we've run into. Even little parts, little components coming from China are going to be a problem for you. So if you bid on an end item for an aircraft and a component is coming from China and you've got the Buy American Act in your contract, which you probably do, there's going to be a problem. So be aware of where your material's coming from. And then government property. If you have government property in your possession, you have to manage it. And that means you have to have some sort of a government property system. And depending on how much and what kind of property, that could also be a cost factor for you. And subcontracting, there's lots of rules and lots of procedures and responsibilities. You are responsible for your subcontractor. So have that in mind. If you plan on subcontracting or having a subcontractor, there are flow down clauses for subcontractors, and there are rules about paying them on time. If you're going to enter into a joint venture, my advice is to get some help from the SBA, because now the SBA must approve those. Okay, so of course, what we're going to talk about is solicitations, because that's probably what you're responding to. So there's some key dates in your solicitations that to the proposal due date. There are other dates. And the big foot stomp here is to get whatever help you may be seeking involved early. If there's a pre-proposal meeting, get your PTAC regional manager involved if you plan on seeking help from them or a consultant or anybody for that matter. The more they know up front, the better they are able to help you. So if the period for questions and answers passes, there's not a whole lot they can help you with. So be sure to get them involved early. And some of the terminology changes a little bit from agency to agency. For instance, RFIs, that is a request for information. And most agencies use that during a source of synopsis, for instance, to find out what a company's capability is, or to see if there are small businesses out there capable of meeting the requirements. But for GSA, they use RFI during their solicitation process. So they may have 1 or 2 or 3 different rounds of questions and answers during their solicitation, and they will be called RFIs. So just be aware that there is different that different agencies use the terminology a little bit differently. And there may be amendments to that solicitation that extend the date or require additional things. So just keep the dates in mind for your solicitations. Also the requirements. There could be early submission of documents like past performance information or other information as indicated on the chart here. If you have to create it or go get it, it could be costly for you and you might not have enough time to do that. So be sure that you're aware of that with your solicitations. So the other pricing considerations that you need to think about. And here's Jim. I guess he didn't have any comments on this stuff before, so introducing Jim here.
Hi guys. That's
to give you more time.
Yeah. So, not sure what the audience is. What I'm thinking is it probably ranges. Some of you have, fairly defined systems on how you put your costs together, how you do proposals, all the way down to someone that's, maybe a tire kicker thinking, do I want to get into this business? These are some of the things I need to think about. We're probably going to talk on a kind of just a more basic level. So depending on where you're at on the spectrum, it may be different for you. But the things you need to consider too is if it's a commercial item and if it's government unique. So if it's a commercial item, you're going to, be looking at more like what market prices are. The government's going to be doing a price analysis on determining what your fair and reasonable is. Where if it's a government unique, if it hits certain dollar thresholds, you will have to submit cost data, and we're going to get into all that. But it's going to be a little bit different pricing on how you put your numbers together. One of them you're going to be looking at, I'm bidding to a spec, and I've got to go in and price everything kind of discreetly. Even if you don't have to give them that data, you're going to have to build that price up discreetly. Where under commercial, it's going to be more, okay, this is what the market will bear. I know my product, I know the market, and I'm gonna bid this amount. It's a slightly different, than maybe a COTS thing, but you could just take all that into consideration and just kind of more on a macro level versus a micro level for government unique. Whether it's sole source or competitive, this is going to make a big difference. If it's sole source, you're kind of in the driver's seat if you know that. If they've come to you and said, all right, you're the only ones, we want to do this, you're going to put together your proposal a little bit differently. You're going to not take as many risks because you already have the work, and now you're getting to the point where, I need to put together a number that I can justify as being fair and reasonable. And whereas it's competitive, you might have to sharpen your pencil a little bit. You're going to say, okay, what does this item cost me now? What are going to be benefits of having this contract, with my existing contracts that I have? It's like people had asked me in the past, why would anybody ever bid anything cost? Because we had people come in and bid stuff at cost and sometimes even a little bit below. And they say, why would someone do that? It's because they're bringing in a big chunk of business into their base, which then makes all their other contracts that they currently have more profitable because they can spread out some of their fixed costs that are in their indirect rate pools further, and we're going to get into that when we talk a little bit about overhead pools. So the types of pricing and cost information that you might have to provide, we're going to go over those. We'll talk about what price information is versus what cost information is. If we get to the point that there has to be certified cost information, we'll talk about a little bit about what that process is and then what other than certified cost is. We'll also talk a little bit about what fair and reasonable price determinations entail. If you're hoping for some magic words about you do this, it will be fair and reasonable, you're going to be sorely disappointed, but we will go over that. So let's get to it.
Lisa asked a question about, is there a good mechanism to exclude excessive cost escalation? For example, in the current market, cost escalation is beginning to occur steeply following the COVID market impact. So like $90 or $90,000 worth of lumber in February came back at $140,000 this month, which is a huge escalation. So she just wants to see if there's a good mechanism to exclude excessive cost escalation.
That's a really good question, Josh. And I think what, Lisa, if after the fact, I think what you would have to do is go in with a request for equitable adjustments. And we've been down that road a lot. But if we knew up front, like right now, you were pricing a contract up front, I think what I would recommend to the government, if they hadn't solicited that way, is let's do a fixed price with an economic price adjustment. It's a contract type where most of the things are fairly stable. We would use these if we had something like, okay, we know what this contract's going to take, but this contract has lots of fuel involved in it. And fuel is very volatile, goes up and down all the time. So we would tie an economic price adjustment to that particular element of the contract. And you could do the same thing with specialty metals in the past. I never would have thought it would have gotten to the point with lumber, but it has gotten to that point with lumber. So if you're bidding something right now, you could potentially ask the government to say, hey, could we put together a fixed price contract, but have an EPA, an economic price adjustment for lumber because of the volatility of lumber. We don't want to have a situation where, we're put out of business because we price current lumber prices and then they just, skyrocket. Or the government doesn't want to be hurt where we price things at a current market price, a COVID price, which is significantly higher. And now the bottom kind of drops back out. We get back to normal. And now because we priced our lumber at a COVID price, they went back from, $30 a sheet to plywood back to $5. We just had this windfall profit. So you can talk to them about how it would be a win-win and cover both sides. But that would be front pricing of something. Does that make sense, Lisa? I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, you're not. There we go. Okay. So yeah, up front, I know the contract I think you're talking about, and that might be something that you could talk about if that was, you've got a big lumber portion of that, is to say, hey, let's put in some sort of EPA on this, that we end up paying what it is for that particular element. So, and the way you'd set that up is if 10% of the total contract price was lumber, then you'd have an index, you tie it to it, and then whatever happened to that index, 10% of that contract price would be adjusted. It's fairly.
Hey, I got a follow up. This is Tom Gerke. I got a quick follow up on that. I noticed that in trying to source pressure treated lumber, that none of the DIY stores have any in stock at all. So it's one thing to do an economic price adjustment, but what if in performance because you can't even get the material?
Well, I think if there's a delay in performance, again, you would go back to the government with some sort of economic price adjustment, and hopefully you have a reasonable contract team, which Lisa's not familiar with. But if you had a reasonable contract team, then they'd say, yeah, we understand this is happening, we'll give you time. Or potentially if the prices have gone crazy, they could say, all right, no one could foresee this. No one, when this contract was priced out and let, no one had any idea that a pandemic was coming and price accordingly. And they would bring reason into it and, negotiate some sort of equitable adjustment. So that's what's going to be if you have something in place. Up front, I guess what I would do is ask the government, okay, I'm trying to put together a quote. You've got this small business set aside. I want to play. I'm going out and I'm looking for material to quote. Can't find any of it. I can't find any of it. I imagine my competitors are in the same boat. How do you want us to handle this? And kind of put it back into their court. Because at the end of the day, if you can't get prices on it, you can't quote it. Or I guess you could quote it and take a risk that, okay, I am going to be able to get it at some point. But it's almost, with the scarcity thing, it's almost like trying to quote an obsolete part on some of the government unique items I saw in the past. It was really difficult. Sole source, they would put some sort of placeholder in there, but competitively, you're going to be on the hook for that. If you win that award, you're going to have to deliver at that price. So, perfect. Okay, so pricing policy, right? This is how we're going to look at what we're going to tell you is how the government kind of looks at your pricing costs and the data that you submit, what their job to do, right? So price equals, the definition of price is it's all cost plus profit or fee, right? So that's, you're coming up with your price. What you kind of want to know is how's the government going to analyze your price? Well, that kind of depends on whether it hits a certain dollar threshold, whether it's competitive or not competitive. But if they're doing price analysis on it, then what they should be looking at is just the price. They're not going to look at any of the cost elements. Well, they should not be looking at it. I'm not going to speak absolutely because I've seen stuff since I've started helping small businesses that I didn't imagine would take place. But they should be looking at a bottom line price. And they're not worried about if you've got, 1,000% profit in there or what you have in material. They're concerned about the bottom line price. If you go buy a car, you're looking at that price. Yeah, you add on some things for options, but you're not seeing how much the metal was that went in that or the paint went. They're looking at the price. That's what the government's supposed to be looking at. Now, if it's cost analysis, it's going to be a different situation. They're going to ask you for a cost breakdown, right? If it hits a threshold. So if it's under $2 million, the government shall do price analysis. It says that in the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations. They shall do it. If they can't get to what they determine fair and reasonable using price analysis, they may ask for some cost data to get there, but it would be kind of minimal, and you'd want to provide as little as possible. And if possible, I would provide some price information to the government that helps them do their job. Oh, you can't go find stuff on the marketplace. Here's what some of my competitors have out there for similar items, and here's some of the stuff here. And as you can see, my price is fair. Most people would jump at that because now they've got, oh, all right, there's my rationale right there. I supported it. But if they can't get to it using price, they may ask you for some minimal cost data to try and get to that point. The difference between when they shall do cost analysis is that it would be under $2 million, and so it wouldn't be certified. Now, if you're the only offer and it's over $2 million and no exceptions apply, the exceptions are competition, commercial item, set by law, so like electricity, something like that, or if they got in a waiver, which I never saw in 35 years. So no exceptions apply, then you're going to have to provide your material costs, your labor costs, your overhead rates, and all of those elements will be evaluated individually. But anyway, back to price, what some of the, I guess, examples of price data would be, okay, you want some price data from me? Here's what I sold this to other people for. You can see I'm selling it to you for a similar price. The government used to always want to have most preferred status as a customer, but we didn't always have the biggest quantities and all that. So you would even do some sort of adjustments there and say, look, I sold it to this other guy. They bought 100,000 items. You're buying 10,000 items. Yours is slightly higher due to economies of scale. Or if you want to take a look, we've got prices on GSA schedule for these items. If you want to go buy them there, you can buy them there. But you can also say, I'm going to use that schedule as a piece to do my price analysis. Or you could pull something similar in the marketplace and say these things are fairly compatible. They're not, it's obviously not a exact thing, or the government would have just bought them, from the marketplace. But you would go in and say, look, we're 90% the same as these, and you can see based on their price that we're right there in the ballpark, and it should be adequate. So that's the type of information you would provide if it was priced. Josh, next slide. Okay, cost. So this is when we're going to have to, like I said, if certified cost or pricing data is required, then the government shall do that. They're also going to ask for cost data. It's not going to be certified, but they're going to ask for cost data if it's a competitive cost proposal, because what they're worried about on competition. So in sole source, they're worried about the prices being too high, right? And so they're going to go in, they're going to analyze your costs to see if they're too high. We'll get into that a little bit. But in a competitive cost environment, they're worried about contractors coming in too low. And the reason they're worried about that, because it's a cost contract. So if you come in and bid $1 million and it costs $4 million, like Patty said, all of the costs are allowable. We're going to pay $4 million as the government, right? So we're worried about it being too low. So we do what they call is price realism analysis. And is this a realistic price? So prices can be unrealistically low and unreasonably high. So you get cost analysis for that. But if you had a cost contract you're bidding on, the government's going to ask you for some data so that they can do analysis to determine that your costs are realistic. Because if you go in and say, back to the plywood thing. Well, I've gone in and I've bid all this plywood to do this project here. It's a cost contract, and I bid it at $5 a sheet. Well, that's not realistic. We know it's $30+ a sheet right now. So the government might ask you an EN, or they might automatically adjust your price for comparison purposes to determine who gets that award. So that would be an instance where you would do cost analysis as well. So the next bullet is, like Patty talked about that a little bit as well, is on the cost contracts, it's going to be really important as to you understanding what costs are allowable. I believe it's part 31 in the FAR that has a bunch of these costs that aren't allowable. Interest is non-allowable cost. If you submit an invoice that has interest on it, that will not be an allowable cost. Alcohol is not allowable cost. Those things are not allowable. And it might have been for that contract. You might have had a party for your people because they're doing so well. You will not be reimbursed for that. So you just need to kind of understand that. Where once you've done a fixed price contract, those costs will be analyzed up front. If the government, if it's sole source, still negotiating it, they might take those out and say, okay, you know what, we found these, they're not allowable, we're taking them out. Now they've set a price. You're going to get paid that price no matter what cost you spend. If you want to spend your costs on interest and alcohol or whatever, that's up to you, because you're only going to be paid that set amount that the government has negotiated with you. For large businesses under a cost type contract, they're going to have a compliant method or be compliant with CAS. So small businesses, CAS is not applicable. So I doubt anybody in this office or in this presentation has to worry about CAS. What you do need to worry about is if you're going after a cost contract is that you have an adequate system. The government has to have confidence that your accounting system is adequate. And if it's adequate, then you can be, a potential recipient of a cost contract from the government. I did not see a lot of cost contracts for small businesses, but there are some out there. So if you're going to pursue that, just make sure you have a system that's adequate. You can demonstrate to the government, look, I can accurately track costs from all my different contracts, so that they're like, okay, we're good with these guys. Next question. Next slide. Okay, so certified cost of pricing data. So if we have a sole source acquisition that's over $2 million, no exceptions apply. What you're going to do is you're going to provide cost and pricing data to the government as part of your proposal. That's what they're going to use to analyze your proposal for fair and reasonable. And what you're going to have to do is, once you settle on a price, whatever that date is, say you settle on the price today, you're going to sign a certificate that says, I've provided you all of the data that I have, and it's current, accurate, complete as of this day. So it's current meaning that, I got a quote in yesterday, you got it. If you get a quote in tomorrow, it doesn't matter. You don't have to provide that to the government. It's the data price agreement. But if not, if you didn't give them all the data, if you said, I only gave them the data I used. No, maybe they don't like the data you used. Maybe you had some historical actions because you built the item they're buying from you 10 times and you took 3 of the jobs and averaged them and you only gave them those 3 jobs. Nope, you got to give them all 10 jobs. It's got to be complete. They've got to have everything, right? Because maybe they don't agree with your analysis of those 3 jobs are representative, and they're going to take, some different jobs, or maybe they're going to take all 10, and that's where the negotiation part comes in. And you're going to tell them why all 10 aren't representative. Is I only took 3 because they're the last 3, and we reorganized our shop at that point. So that's why I only use those. That's all part of the stuff you're going to negotiate, but you got to give them everything. Because if they come in after the fact and find out that you didn't, then you could be liable for defective pricing. And that's just the point where they say, well, if we had this information, this is what it would have cost. I never saw defective pricing much on small businesses, but you need to be aware of it. It's something that could affect your prices and stuff. Other than certified is you're giving them data, but you're just not signing that certificate. So,
Jim?
Yeah.
I have 2 questions on this. Does this apply to fixed price contracts?
This applies to any sole source contract. It applies to cost. It applies to fixed price. Anything that's source and no exceptions apply and is over $2 million.
And by no exceptions applying, then how does this relate to a 8A or service disabled veteran note set aside?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. And it's funny you asked that, because in one of our DAU classes, that's one of the answers. What are the exceptions to certified cost or pricing data? And small business is one of the ones. And the majority of the contracting officers miss that because it is not an exception. You're held to the same thing. The exceptions are commercial. The exceptions are competition, right? Set by law. And whether there's a waiver or whether there's a modification to a commercial.
So a direct award to a small business, Native American, Alaskan Native company.
Yep, doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Applies to everyone. It's an equal opportunity enforcer. It doesn't. There's no benefits to that. So they're basically just saying that as a small business, as a large business, if you have data, you got to give it to the government. So that they're on the same footing as you when they enter into negotiations. I mean, how you interpret that data and, come up and support your position, that's the whole negotiation process right there. So yeah, no, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked that. A lot of people think that, I'm a small business, it doesn't apply, but absolutely it does apply. So
I've got another question from Lisa, who asks if you would clarify the difference between interest and the cost of monies, because interest, as you said, was not allowable, but the cost of money is.
Right. We will get to the cost of money. I'll talk that a little bit. I had that I did on one of the slides, so we'll talk about that. So, okay. No, that's a good question. Yeah, we'll get to that. So next slide. Okay, so fair and reasonable. This is again, everybody wants to know, what does the government think's fair and reasonable? Well, it's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, you go look in the fire, you're not going to find a definition of fair and reasonable, but you're going to see fair and reasonable sprinkled throughout the whole thing. Contracting officer must determine fair and reasonable, can award prices that are not fair and reasonable. I mean, it's what each individual thinks. And so in some, to kind of give an example of this, so I teach a negotiation class, and I've taught this class a lot, and what we do is we divide the teams up, and 1 week 3 of the teams are the contractor and 3 of them are the government, and the next week they switch, and we'll have prices. They all have the same package, right? They all have the same scenario. It's all the same information for all of the different teams. It's just the same. It's just, they're all getting their shot at it. We come up with prices that are millions of dollars apart, yet all of them have come to an agreement, both sides, contractor and government, and determine those prices fair and reasonable. So it's really, in my eyes, just demonstrates, it's just kind of like how well you sell your argument and what one person is comfortable with. I've seen it even amongst the professors, where some professors they should have that. They should have that. And I'm thinking, maybe they should or maybe they shouldn't, But it's just, this is what you're going to run into, is you're going to run into some contracting officers that whatever you submit to them, we're going to say, yeah, you know what? That sounds reasonable to me. I'm good with that and agree with that price. Another contracting officer may never be happy, right? They may never be happy, and they spend more money negotiating these things than the actual dollar amounts that are being negotiated. And I'm seeing this going on right now, and it's just, it's really amazing. So hopefully, that with competition, then that's not an issue, right? Because the government kind of considers that competition is going to determine fair and reasonable. It's what the market will bear. We've got 3 people that have bid on this thing. The lowest one bid it. The lowest one that bid was responsible. They understand the requirement. We're going with them. That's a fair and reasonable price. So it's just when we get into the sole source stuff that we run into these problems. So if you're looking for something magical, you're not going to find it. I never found it in 35 years. I don't think you guys are going to find it either. So that's kind of, I don't know if that's a cop-out or not, but what you're going to do is go through the process with them of trying to help them get there. And that's where I talked about on like the pricing data you give them. The more data you can give them that support your position, look, here's some products out by company C, D, and E in the marketplace. They're all significantly higher than mine. They're not the same product, but they're real similar. But that's information they can use to say, oh, that price looks fair and reasonable. So you're kind of helping them do their job a little bit. But if it gets you the price that you want and you think is a good price, then that's what it might take. So on the cost stuff, it will be the same thing as well. But you're gonna tell them why. Like, go back to the labor example I had. this is why these 3 jobs are more applicable. And as you can see, some of these jobs are actually lower than some of my previous ones. I didn't go in and cherry pick and just take the highest ones. You know, I took the ones that I thought were the most representative, and I think the last 3 jobs that came off the line are the most representative. You know, even though the quantities may not be exactly the same as we're buying now, they're the most representative, and that's kind of the process you go through of helping the government analyze some of that data. So, and then what you have to give them will be, you know, when they're finally confident that okay, I've got a fair and reasonable price. Once again, that's going to be based on the CO you deal with, and hopefully you don't have to deal with some certain COs out there because some of them are never happy. They're never happy. So anyway, next slide. Okay, so there's 2 types of costs when we're talking, if we've got to give cost data, right? If you're going to provide cost data, there's 2 types of costs. There's direct costs and indirect costs. As small businesses, you need to be aware of both. So the direct costs are going to be the costs you have associated with that particular contract. If you don't have that contract, you're not going to incur those costs. You know, you're not going to have that material. You're not going to have that those labor hours incurred because it's directly associated with that contract and only that contract. So under material, some of the data that you would have to provide to support those costs is you might provide quotes. You might say, all right, we with material contractors, we put together what we saw and we refer to as a bill of material. They're BOM. You know, this is all the material that's in our you know, particular quote here. And then we go through and look at certain things. But that material might be supported by, you know, here's a quote for this item, you know. And if you have a couple quotes and have chosen the lowest one, then the government really likes that. It's like, oh, they had competition on that. Good. They went with the lowest person. Good. We like that. It might be a previous PO that you had for a similar, you know, quantity that you had placed previously. You know, it's like, oh, we haven't got quotes back from the guy yet, but we bought 100 of these things from him last year. We need 100 now, so we're taking that purchase order and maybe some escalation you would add to it. Or you might have some stuff in inventory and you would just quote it out that way. But those would be direct costs that are going to be incurred on that contract for that material. But that would be the type of data you would provide to them. If you don't have any of that stuff, sometimes we'd see what they put in, like, you know, engineering estimate. You know, we put in an estimate of what we think it might take. That might be a little bit high. And when I'm looking at stuff like this, I'm thinking that we're basically in a sole source situation where you have to provide this cost data. And you have that engineering estimate in place just so you can get that proposal out, because you can't sit and wait forever for that last thing to come in. So you throw in kind of that placeholder. And then once you actually get down to negotiating with the government, hopefully you'll have something more definitive at that point in time. So that's kind of what I do there. And on that placeholder, I'd make sure that, you know, if you go back to what Patty said, you've alleviated your risk. So, you know, you've estimated kind of on the high end because you plan on updating as soon as that information does come in. You just don't want to sit waiting on that last piece, right? And then on labor, the type of stuff you would give is you would say, all right, well, this is our historical labor hours. This is, you know, back to that job again. Here's the 3 jobs we used, and then you'd provide all 10 jobs, all 10 historical jobs. But these are why we chose these 3 jobs, and that would be kind of your basis of estimate for labor. You do the same thing with the skill mix that you propose, you know, and it might be a historical skill mix. It might be that you broke down the requirement, you discretely estimated it. You've gone in and said that, hey, you know, I've broken down your statement of work, and I think I need a senior engineer for 4 hours a day for the duration of the contract. So basically half time. And so that's why I've proposed that. As far as the laborers go, you know, and this is why I've proposed this. It might be some sort of, you know, industry standard. It might be a historical one. It may be purely judgmental on your part, but you're going to have to, you know, provide some rationale as to why it's a good skill mix and represents what, you know, should, you know, be incurred, reasonably be expected to be incurred in performance of this contract. When I was analyzing proposals, I relied a lot on history. I mean, I would go look at the contractor's history. I kind of, if I had history, if I had actuals for a job that the contractor had previously performed, you know, fixed price basis, I figured that when a contractor had that contract, you know, he was doing it as efficiently and as effectively as he could, and that skill mix would reflect what it took to do the job. Because if it was underrun, if he didn't have to use higher paid people, he necessarily wouldn't, because that's more money that would go into his pocket. Because at that point, it's on contract, right? So I would use history a lot when I evaluated things. I don't know what the people will look at when you know, if you have a job with them, they'll send things over to the engineering side sometimes. And you get a mix of engineers as well. Some engineers would dig into it. No, it shouldn't take that much. They have no reason. They just pull it out of the air, but they'll try and cut hours and move people around. And the other people will blink at it once and hit it with the rubber stamp, says, hey, it looks good to me, you know, and not really doing it either way. So again, it's going to depend on what you run into. You just need to be prepared as contractors that if you are asked questions, that you can say, yeah, this is how I came up with this thing. This is, you know, what I've ran in the past, and I've adjusted a little bit because we lost a keeper, or, you know, whatever reason you have to support what you've come up with. And it'll be the same thing on labor rates. You know, you'll propose, and this is an important one. I think we can get onto it a little further, but you need to propose what, you know, what maybe your people make, and if you have to hire people, what you're going to have to hire them for. So I think we'll get into that a little more detail on the next chart. So let's go to the next chart. Okay, so this is it. Look at that. As promised, right? There's the labor and wages. So Patty kind of, you know, talked about this a little bit. Are there any contract requirements, minimums that must be followed? This was a bigger deal back in the day. I remember people used to love to get work out on the base, construction work, because, you know, you might get paid $5 an hour out on the economy if you're a journeyman laborer, you know, a framer or whatever. But if your company got one of those good base jobs, well, the base you would make $8 an hour, because of the Davis-Bacon Act, they had to pay these minimums. This isn't as, I didn't see this as much a problem lately, because things have just gotten so expensive that these kind of lagged behind a little bit. So so people were paying. You can pay your people a lot more than this, but you have to pay them these minimums. So you need to know that if your contract requires these, has these requirements in it, then that you've met these minimums for the different categories that are applicable to your contract. And then knowing the market, this is kind of an interesting one, because sometimes as these small businesses, you guys are asked to bid something that takes place in multiple states, right? So you're going to have efforts. I saw some stuff with the Forest Service, and you have all these different forests in the western region out here. And if you have to hire people from these different states, you need to understand that market a little bit. I mean, if you got to hire someone in Jackson Hole, you might have to pay them a lot more than maybe your current people that you have just handling the around here in Utah, right? So you got to be aware of that. That's risk, knowing that you know what the wages are going to be for the different areas that you are being expected to bid on. Then probably not as applicable, but it could be, and depending on what work you go after. But do they have to have security clearances? You know, you're going to have to pay more for someone that has a clearance. Or will your people be able to get clearances? You know, this was a thing I worked in the classified area the last few years of my Air Force career. And, you know, some people, you know, you think, okay, yeah, we're going to bring them up even to work in contracting for us. So this wasn't on the contractor side, but in contracting, they couldn't get a clearance because they either had financial debt, or they had a foreign relative, or, you know, that had married into the family. All these things you just need to understand that this could affect your ability to bid on something and win something, and it could have a tremendous cost associated if you have to go down and chase down clearances for people. And more applicable to you guys is if the statement of work has required certain certification levels or licenses. Right, we need, you know, and I'm a moron when it comes to construction, but if you have, you know, certain levels of laborers that they've got to have this certain licensing, then you know, do your people have that? And if not, what's going to be the cost to get it? You know, and what's going to be the time frame to get it to? And if you need to hire more of them, what's the marketplace like? Are you going to have to overpay to get those people because they're in high demand? And these are legitimate costs and concerns you have to have if you're going to have to staff up for an effort that you're bidding on. Then you also need to understand what total compensation is. Total compensation is just not the hourly rate you pay them. We had a contract where we had to go in. It was a small business set aside, so it's right up your alley. It was dealing with a facility back in Virginia, and the way they set it up is they looked at the people's technical plans, and if they passed, they went to the lowest person, and they went in and looked at their total compensation plan. So total compensation, we're talking what fringe benefits do they have? How much paid time off? How much of the insurance is paid? What medical? And we went in and reviewed those plans to make sure that they were reasonable. They didn't have to be the same. There weren't minimums that had to be met. They just had to be, reasonable. If you went in and had your total compensation and you're only given, 4 holidays a year, yet, the federal government has 10, all the other people have 10, they're going to say, you know what, that's not reasonable. You're going to have a hard time hiring people and retaining people if you're only offering 4 paid holidays. Yeah, you might have someone out of the gate that takes this job while they go look for another job, but you need to understand that. So that's just kind of the whole total compensation piece that you need to understand. It's not just the hourly rate. It's everything that you have to provide to retirement. Again, all that stuff. So next slide. Okay, so now we're into the indirect stuff, and this is stuff that's a lot more confusing, especially for the smaller companies too. So you'll hear it called indirect rates, overhead rates, burdens. They'll ask for a fully burdened labor rate. You might think, well, what do they mean by that? Well, that just means that everything is applied to it that should be applied to it. So a fully burdened labor rate would mean you just have applied the fringe rate to it. Right? Fringe is what we just talked about, their fringe benefits. That's their paid time off, their retirement, all that sick leave if they have sick leave. If you have to figure in a portion of jury duty, whatever all the costs you've had to pay for your employees for their benefits needs to be figured into that. Then it would be hit with the overhead amount. Then it would be hit with G&A, and then that would be fully burdened through there before profit. That would be fully burdened all the way through there. So. And when I'm seeing fringe, overhead, these things, these are just examples. The way a business sets up their system is up to them. A lot of small business I've seen when I was reviewing and analyzing proposals is they'd have one single rate. It was a catch-all, and they'd call it G&A, general and administrative, and they'd have their fringe in there, and they'd had everything in there. It was just, very simple thing that how they'd set it up, and the more, I guess maybe the bigger you get or the more detailed you get, if you have different divisions that are going to be bidding on different stuff, maybe you'll have an overhead rate for each division. However you set it up, that's up to you. But you just need to be aware of what those costs are. A lot of times I've seen people have put together proposals, and they like, okay, this is what I'm going to pay this guy, and this is how much I have to pay his fringe, and then and I've added some profit onto that. And then, and we sometimes have to ask the contractors, well, what about, don't you have any rent on your building? Don't you pay utility bills? What's going on here? Where are you capturing all those? And they'll be like, oh yeah, slap to the forehead. It's like, oh, I don't understand. That's right. And so you need to realize that you've got a lot of costs, and you need to make sure that you've got them all built to your proposals, and that your contract that you're bidding on is paying their share. So you can't put them all on like one contract if you have multiple contracts and say, well, this contract covered them all. Each contract has to bear its fair share, and what the government's going to do is analyze to make sure that, that they're paying their fair share. So you need to understand like what's in your pool. So if you're going to come up with this rate, come up with a indirect rate, that's just your pool cost divided by whatever base you've chosen to be your base. However, you're going to allocate those costs over and recover them. So you got to realize, okay, what's in my pool? Do I have rent in there? Other costs. You'll have labor in there. Is my salary in there as the CEO of this company? I'm not going to be charging on this contract direct because I've got 4 contracts going on. I'm overseeing them all, but my salary needs to be recovered. So it's going to be recovered indirectly. It's going to go into this cost pool. If you had security or something like that, if you have, and we'll go through, we've got an Excel spreadsheet that we actually worked on with a small business and put together that kind of shows you that. But even the spreadsheets would be different for everybody, but it'll give you an idea of just some of those things. Do I have any licenses? You know, do I have, well, I've got to have phones for my business. Well, that would go in there. You're not going to charge that directly to a contract. You're going to have your cell phone costs for your workers. You're going to have whatever things you need, licenses for Microsoft Office. You know, if you have to have anything like that. Now, if the contract you're bidding on requires a specific licensing, that would not go in this pool. That's a direct cost because that contract is requiring that, and that's the only contract that's benefiting from it. So then that cost would not be in the pool. That would be a direct cost. You might have, you know, some software that's bid directly. That's what would be another direct cost, right? Because it's direct for that contract. But even though it sounds like a pool cost, it's not. Then you need to understand your base estimate. You know, okay, your base is like how much business do I have? So if it's an overhead rate, it's like, okay, I'm going to come up with an overhead rate. Well, usually what I saw in overhead 95% of the time was direct labor dollars would be the base. So for every direct labor dollar that I have on my contract, I'm going to have to recover a certain amount of these pool costs. So say your pool costs were $1 million and your direct labor base is $10 million. So just to keep numbers simple, so your rate is 10%, right? So my overhead rate is 10%. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to bid this contract. And for every dollar I have in direct labor dollars, I've got to charge them 10% or recover 10 cents to pay for my supervisors that are in there because they're not, I mean, they're supporting all the contracts. So they're in there. You got to help cover my rent. So I got to get 10 cents for every dollar that I have in there. So you just kind of have to understand that. Usually with small businesses is I'd see historical rates. Right? It's like, this is what I bid this is what I incurred last year. That's why I bid it, or if you have a provisional billing rate, you might see that as well. Right? And those would be good things to bid there. So then we get to facility capital cost of money. And Lisa, you had asked about this. So the difference between these is, so facilities capital cost of money is just an entitlement. It's not interest. What it is if you've got in your overhead pool here, if you've got some undepreciated assets, right? So say you have something with a net book value in your rate of $500,000 in there, some big piece of equipment or something like that. You're entitled to some facilities capital cost of money on that. And there's a formula through that where you take it and the treasury rate's involved, you divide it by that, and you come up with, it's a fairly minuscule amount, but you're entitled to it and you can get that back. So it's basically the government acknowledging whether these things were paid for with cash or whether you taken out a loan on them, hence the interest and all that, doesn't matter. What it is they're not fully depreciated. The government's benefited from them. We acknowledge as the government that there's a certain amount of benefit we're deriving from these things, so we give you some money for that. And this is where you get that money. If it's not in the contract up front, you can't get it later. So if you're doing it, it's not like, oh, I forgot to put it in when we priced out this original contract. We're doing this mod. Let's put it in now. Yeah, you can't do that. It's got to be in there up front, but you could be entitled to that. If you think you're to that point, if you have something sole source, just look into it. You could, request some help through PTAC, and if they need it, they could ask us. And whoa, we're going crazy there. So anyway, that's what facility capital cost of money is. Lisa, we could go over it more if you have more detailed questions on that, but it is not interest. And interest, you build interest in your proposals. When you're bidding on something competitively fixed price, that's a legitimate cost you incur. You just won't be reimbursed for interest on a cost contract, or if you put in interest as a specific cost in a sole source thing that's being looked at with cost data, it won't be allowed there. But you've got to, obviously it's something you've got to consider when you're putting your price together. So don't misinterpret that we're saying, no, you can't have that in your proposals. You're bidding stuff competitively, you've got to have in there what's going to cost you to produce that item or service. So next. Okay, this is kind of more of the same, just understanding that, if you know what your pool elements are and what it is, what contract you're bidding on, what impact is that going to have on it? So if historically your rate was, say, hey, I had a certain amount of business last year and my G&A rate was 15%, right? But now I'm getting this big contract, or I'm bidding on this big contract. Let's say it's competitively. We don't want to go in and bid 15% if you still have the same amount of business you had last year, but now you're going to add this great big contract that you're bidding on into your base. What impact will that have on your base? And then you can go in and bid a lower rate, which will make you more competitively because your cost isn't going to be as high. Things like rent and supervised security guards, those are all fixed costs. If you have a little business or a lot of business, those things, you got to pay them. But if you got a big base, you're going to spread them further, so that rate's going to be lower. So and then the same thing with the variable cost, just knowing the mix between those so you know how much to adjust your rate, how much you can sharpen your pencil when you're going after this business. Okay, next. Okay, profit or fee, it's the dealer's choice on this. You bid what you want to bid. Fee does have some statutory limits. If you're bidding a cost plus fixed fee contract, statutory limits only apply to CPFF contracts for that, but you can't exceed 10% for normal production type contracts, and you can't exceed 15% for research and development contracts. But normally this is something you're going to bid, based on the situation. It's a reflection of risk, right? So if it's a sole source situation and you think it's pretty risky, I mean, you're gonna bid more sole source than you're gonna bid competitively. Because if you bid too much competitively, you'll just price yourself right out of the competition. You won't have a shot of it. But you've also got to make sure you don't bid too aggressively to the point that, that you go out of business trying to win this contract. Well, I didn't leave myself a margin. Things didn't fall as profitable. Now I'm subsidizing the government on this thing. Now I'm out of business. So it's a tough decision there. But this is kind of whatever you want. You kind of know your market, however many people you think are bidding on this thing, kind of bid accordingly. Next slide. Okay, escalation, this is up to you. Again, and sole source stuff, if you've gone in and escalated, which I would say do, just make sure you've got a credible index. The government uses Global Insight, but you could also use, your historical ones. I know that, we would have recommendations from ours, and we were dealing with a company in the DC area, and we're looking at theirs, and their escalation on their labor was way higher than what the index said it should be. And when we went back and looked and saw that, this is what they had to pay to get people in this area, that particular market. So these indexes are supposed to reflect the regions and the markets they're in, but they don't always do that. But if you can support what you've come up with, and this is why I tell the government people when I do it, I say that these indexes aren't gospel, because a lot of government people say, no, this is what we're given and you have to use this. Just say, no, it's just a guideline. And this is what we're paying our people. If we didn't have to pay our people this much to keep them, we wouldn't have done that, because that would have been just more profit in our pockets and kind of just, sell however you do it. And then you also need to understand whether on your labor, whether your increases include COLA and merit. And the government doesn't always understand this. They'll say, oh, well, President Trump only gave us 1.5%, and you've proposed 2.5% escalation. We're not going to, if I'm not getting it, you're not getting it, And then you have to say, well, wait a minute, but you're under the GS system, right? Right, I'm under the GS system. Would you get a step raise, right? Did Trump take that away? No, that's a merit increase. So there's two different types of escalation here. One of them, because your people, I've got to pay them more to keep them. Other one, you're paying them a COLA to keep them up their spending their spending power with what's happening out in the general marketplace. So that's kind of the difference between the two. Just kind of understand that. And then if you're talking to the government and explaining, why yours is fair, just say this takes into account both COLA and merit. So you can't really compare it just to what you're getting under a COLA. It's not apples to apples. Okay, next slide. Okay, if you're doing ranges, this is a tough one. These are ones where, again, I would ask questions up front, because the government might ask you to come in and price a range, right? And that range is from 1 to 10. Well, if you've got setup costs and other things like that in there, that first unit's going to cost you, one unit's going to cost you a lot more to produce the 10 units. So you've got to say, well, do you have a best estimated quantity, or how do you want to price it? You want to price, sole source, you're probably going to be pricing that first unit, saying, oh, that's all you're guaranteeing me, and then you guys can negotiate accordingly, you know. But they're going to ask you for one price for that whole range of 1 to 10, and then maybe another price from 10 to 20, and you got to decide how you're going to do it. Do I want to take a middle quantity or do whatever? So you need to understand those aspects of pricing ranges. And the solicitation, is it telling you, you know, what's going to be awarded, how much? Do you have a certain minimum? Do you have to bid all things? You pretty much have to do what the solicitation says, or under competition, they'll just throw you out. They'll say, you know, you're non-responsive and throw you out. So make sure that you're following what the solicitation says. Okay, next. Okay, if you have a first article, just make sure that this is where your non-recurring costs are. The government likes unit price integrity. They want your unit price for your quantity to reflect what it takes. First article should be all those non-recurring costs, and you'll get those paid when you deliver that first article. So you're not waiting to get a little bit back of all your upfront costs until you deliver your last unit. And do it as much as you can. I mean, the government's, you know, they're far from perfect, right? So try and get things in as quick as possible, because even at that, the government may take their time, you know, accepting things and doing things. And you're sitting there thinking, I've spent money, I need to get this, I need to get paid. So I mean, that's kind of self-explanatory, you know. Next. Okay, so anyway, follow the instructions in L&M. I want to pull up this spreadsheet we have, so we'll need control again.
No, just have Josh do it.
Okay.
Send it to Josh.
All right. Josh, we're going to have you pull up the spreadsheet, but do what L&M says. So this spreadsheet, why he's pulling it up, it's just an example of one we put together, and what it does is it allows someone to put together a bid. It's for like services. So the big kind of concern on it was, you know, well, what effects are things going to have on my G&A, you know, escalation stuff. You want to, so we'll just show you real quickly. Everybody's would be different. You'd set it up for whatever it is you're doing and whatever works for you. We happen to, instead of creating a percentage rate on this particular one, we did an hourly rate for the G&A. So we'll set up for like the different categories. So here's the different categories. You put in your annual hours, right? And whatever you're paying them, it computes the hourly rate, and then it computes the paid time off depending on how many hours they have. Then it computes the cost for that paid time off, comes over, you know, computes holiday hours, and then it has the direct labor hours that, you know, based on how many days they get off, that they're actually going to be able to bill. Because you're not going to bill for 2080. You're not going to have anybody that works 2080, right? That's 40 hours a week for 52 weeks. It's not going to happen. So you need to make sure you recover the cost for those days that they're off, and that's, you know, the fringe benefits. So then it figures into taxes you're going to have to pay. So you scroll over, and everything. If you go down a little bit, you can see the stuff's formula driven. State unemployment tax, it was just an input because I didn't know what that was. For health insurance, figured $1,000 a month on that. That's something you could either do. And if you look at the bottom here, it shows base, option year 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what we've done is we've taken the same thing and done it. And then if there's a 401k match, whatever you had, and stuff, you could set it up for whatever. And then we come up with a cost for that individual. Right, scroll, keep going to the right. So there, and you can see on this, there's a G&A rate. So I'll give you an example. G&A rate here is $13, $24. So on this one, because some of these things, the way we added it in, you wouldn't take this total cost down there of $49,000, but you would just delete those out. This was just going to be a model that would be populated as things came along. If you didn't have rows, you wouldn't have a salary in there for anybody. But you come up with a certain amount, and you can say, okay, that's my, you know, anticipated amount. If the government asks you to bid per month or whatever for a services contract or per year. So scroll back to the left and go down. This is the part where we're kind of talking about indirect. So these were things that we had identified were going to be, you know, costs for this company. They had office space of this much, right? They had all these different insurances they had to pay, internet. I mean, things. You just need to think of, what is it taking me to run my business? I need to recoup all these costs. There is some staff, there's some, you know, minor legal costs and all that. Just whatever you could come up with, And then they come up, so we came up with a total of, these are my amounts per year. And so we set it up in the out years for some of these things so that like the salaries were escalated. You know, I mean, you could just kind of set up something simple because you might be asked to bid on a contract for a base period and 4 option periods, and you don't want to go in and bid the same amount for all these years because you're going to probably have to pay your people more. So anyway, let's go in and say, all right, for this one here, we just put in the quantity of employees that they have that are going to be direct cost employees. These are going to be the employees that would be covered that. So let's say this contract we're going to bring on, and it's going to bring another 10 people into my company. They want a certain amount of the labor skill sets we have to offer. So change that quantity to 10 and watch what happens to the G&A rate. See, it just dropped. So now that drops, that pulls back up to the spreadsheet, rolls it through. It's like, wow, if I get this contract, I can actually bid less for G&A. And it reduces my overall price. So it's automatically kind of computing in the effects of what this contract will mean for me. And it's helping me, you know, I'm not going to just go bid, well, my G&A rate was $13 an hour, so I'm bidding 13. No, if I get this contract, I don't need that much because now my salary as a CEO is being spread further. All these things are being spread over more people. They're each recovering a little bit of that cost. So I don't know if this makes sense or not. I mean, this is something, you know, that PTAC or PTAC, you know, through us could help you kind of maybe put something together for your company. But what you can't do is expect PTAC or ourselves to be able to just do this. You have to know these things, and then we help you organize it in a manner. I've had, you know, requests where people wanted some help on something, and I'd ask questions, you know, well, what's it going to take for this? What's it going to take for that? Because you guys all do different stuff, you know, and I'll be the first to admit I'm a moron about 99% of it. I don't know what it's going to take for that stuff. I know, you know, how to organize the numbers. Once you know what those numbers kind of should be, can kind of help you do that kind of things. But we can't just, you know, I had an instance where someone wanted some help on a proposal, and I asked a bunch of questions and said, you need to get some information, you need to get some rate information, you do some of this, and got back crickets. And then all of a sudden, you know, found out that they really were unhappy that I didn't put together a proposal for them. And I'm like, okay, you know, be unhappy because I can't put together what I don't understand. So anyway, these are just things that I think the big thing that I want you guys to understand is when you're bidding on something, to realize what impact is this going to have on my business. Can I go a little bit lower somewhere? Because now, along with what I already have, I've got this incoming contract to share some of these costs and help make you a little bit more attractive when you put your price together. So if hopefully that makes sense. But this is just real quick and dirty. Click on option year 1, the OY1, and then just scroll to the left. Yeah, so see up there, I just put in like under COLA, go to the left. There, 2%. So you could go in and just change that. That would automatically change these annual salaries above so that you represent the escalation. It also took into account the salaries that were in the indirects as well. And scroll down, I think I have something lower down there as well. Yeah, monthly insurance amount too. I changed that so if you wanted to say, well, you know, in the out years, I think insurance is probably going to go up a little bit. You could change that too. All the other stuff was kind of fixed, but you just would want to understand if you have something that is going to increase or decrease. But I've gone way over my allotted time. I'm getting daggers from my co-instructor here.
No, you're
telling me to shut up and stuff. So she'll go through this a little bit, and we can field some questions. Unless you want to, that what you want to do now?
Yeah, I'm going to go through the rest real quick.
Okay, so yeah, she'll blow through the rest, and then if you have questions, we can chat.
Okay. Next slide, please, Josh. So how's the government going to evaluate your proposal or your bid? Well, it just depends. It depends on the dollar amount, whether it's small dollar, large dollar, what type of methodology they're going to use. And that's all contained in the solicitation. They'll tell you. So again, please read your solicitation. Just for informational purposes, The FAR in Part 13 contains the procedures for small dollars. FAR Part 15 contains the procedures for large dollars. But there is a lot of interpretation from different agencies about how they handle large dollar procedures. So see what your solicitation says about the methodology they're going to use. Okay, next slide, please, Josh. So we talked earlier about the contracting officer's determination for price reasonableness. There's a couple others that will affect you. The contractor responsibility is one that is primarily financial questions. GSA has a 3-page financial questionnaire that they send out with all of their solicitations, and it asks a lot of financial information, so just be aware of that. That's part of the contractor responsibility determination that the CO must make. They also could ask you for your code of business ethics. Some companies post that on their website, other companies provide it. You might have to create one if you don't already have one. And then the source selection is their proposal analysis, and it just depends on the dollar amount, whether it was set aside, whether it was competition. Source selections are an integrated assessment, and price may or may not be the most important factor, but it is always a factor. Next slide, please. And always request a debriefing, and there's a time frame that you have to adhere to, and I've got the note here for you. And why is it important? Because it's going to help you the next time. It's going to help you do better, whether you win or not. It'll show you where your strengths and weaknesses lie. It shows if the government made any errors in assumptions, especially where your price was concerned. And it may show if you have a protestable issue. Next slide, please. And this slide is just for your awareness. Protests are very complex, but I'm giving you the time frames here for filing one. And none of the courts are, well, I'm not saying none. The courts will rarely question a contracting officer or a source selection official's judgment. They will usually look to see whether the agency followed their own procedures. And if they did not, then there's a good chance that the protest will be upheld. So just for your awareness here. Next slide, please. After contract award. So this slide really does belong in a pricing discussion, because this is your opportunity to get on the same page with the project and the contract, so that the contract does not end up costing you money. So it's your chance to meet the contracting officer's representative if you haven't already. It's your chance to discuss change orders and modifications, which is really important. And I'm going to tell you why. Next slide, please. The biggest problem that Jim and I have run into this year and previous is contractors doing work that they don't get paid for. And most of the time, it's because someone, apparent authority, that someone other than the contracting officer, directs that work to be done under that contract. And a contract modification is not issued. So then it becomes very difficult for a contractor to get paid. You most of the time have to submit a request for equitable adjustment. Is the easiest way to go, but a lot of times that doesn't work, and you're into a claim. And you know, that's not an easy path either. So difficult government officials, Jim alluded to that already, and communication issues, they come up a lot. So all of these things cause delays, whether it's the government that caused the delay or the contractor. A delay costs you money, because getting paid for those delays is very difficult. So that's why it's important. So next slide, please. So there is help. So if you have difficulties, if you're having a really tough time with something, don't wait till the problem is so large and complex with so many issues that we just can't resolve anything. Get the help sooner rather than later. Your PTAC regional manager is a good place to start. Your small business administration has representatives that can help you. Most agencies have an ombudsman who is supposed to be non-biased, that will investigate your problem or your issue. Your state representative offices can also do inquiries. So all of those people are on board to help you. And LSI consultants are only available through your PTAC regional advisor through a referral process. So my best advice is to be very proactive and keep very good records. Don't let something get out of control if you have a problem after award. Next slide, please. I want to thank everyone, and the next slides are going to, for attending, and the next slides are going to be your PTAC regional manager information. Jim, unless you have something else, I'd like to turn the time back over to Chuck.
No, good.
You're good? Okay, thank you, everyone. Does anyone have a question before we leave?
Yes, we've got some from the chat.
Okay.
Thomas Gerke wanted to point out that every state does have different workers' compensation rates, as you showed on that spreadsheet. So that's just something to be aware of when you're putting together your proposal. Yep.
That particular spreadsheet was people working in different states, so it was going to be a different amount for the different states. So it was just a hard input that would have to be tracked down by the contractor, depending on where those people were at.
Excellent. And then how do you allocate G&A costs across multiple contracts?
G&A costs should be, it's going to be, if you're doing it as a rate, you're going to come up with a rate. And so I guess to back up a little bit, rates are computed for the year. So you're not going to have different G&A rates for different contracts. You're going to come up with what a yearly amount, what your G&A should be, and then you'll allocate that out. Now, if during the year that changes, that's great, but it changes for your whole company. It doesn't change per contract. So then for everything, as you start recovering it, you'll start charging that new G&A rate to your contracts, and you'll start bidding that new G&A rate. If you lost a contract and your rate went up, well, each contract, the G&A base is going to have, for each dollar in the G&A base, it's just going to have to recover a certain amount of those pool costs. So now it might have to start recovering more if all of a sudden, one of your projected contracts went away, or if you receive some additional contracts, how each of those is going to recover a little bit less. But you're just going to allocate it back out based on the whatever you think your business is going to be for the year. If you're going to have $10 million in total direct and indirect costs, total cost input to $10 million, and you've got $1 million in G&A, you've got a 10% rate, all of your contracts, you're going to charge 10% or 10 cents for every dollar you have direct and indirect on those contracts. You're going to charge each of those, and that's how you'll allocate it out. Now, if during the year that changes, like I said, and let's say all of a sudden your rate went to 15%, now you're going to charge each of those contracts 15 cents for every dollar they have that they incur, either directly or indirectly. They'll be charged 15 cents for the total cost of those contracts. It's tough. If I had a whiteboard and some more time, I could show you really quickly, but you'll just, you'll allocate it out equally for the amount of dollars that each of the contracts has. If one contract has $100,000 and it's 15%, they're going to pay $15,000. If another contract is $10,000, they're only going to pay $1,500. They're going to pay that 15% of their total direct and indirect costs. I don't know if that helped or not.
Yes, thank you. And then one other question was that Global Insight costs about $12,000 per year, regardless of company size. This client wanted to know if there's any way to obtain Global Insight data at a lower cost.
I'm not aware of that. What I would do is just find an index. Again, it's just as long as it's credible, and use that. And then if the government, during negotiations, if you're sole source with them, if you have confidence in that, in the index that you're using, it's Global Insight's not the be all end all. That's just what the government we'll probably come back at you with, because that's the one that they have a subscription with for now. But I mean, if you've got a credible index, yeah, do that. I'm not aware of a cheaper Global Insight. I just know that's what they use. So.
Perfect. Thank you.
A couple of small businesses could perhaps go together and purchase one subscription and use it. That might help with costs.
That's a good point. And then for the information of all attendees, we will be sending out the slides and the sample spreadsheet that they went over during the presentation. And then this presentation, the recording will also be posted on the PTAC website. And with that, I will turn the time back over to Chuck.
Thank you, Josh.
Yep. Thanks, Josh.
Absolutely.
Joshua, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for your participation, for your questions. Very good questions with dealing with a very difficult subject. I would like to thank Jim and Patty for their expertise and their efforts in preparing this presentation. Well done. And so thank you. When you have questions about this, get with your PTAC regional members. The PTAC team is a great resource, as has been mentioned. So you're not alone in this. We will be here to help you. Some upcoming events. We still have a number of trainings coming up in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So go to our website to see those and see the details of those. Our website is business.utah.gov/PTAC. Let me repeat that again. business.utah.gov/PTAC. And then our next notable outreach is 2 weeks from today. It's September 24th, and the subject will be Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certificate. So if you are a prime or a subcontractor to a Department of Defense contract, this is now going to be the requirement, and very soon in the future, you are going to be required to have this CMMC certificate. This training will go from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., so about 4 hours. And then also, please put on your calendar, if you haven't already, on October 15th will be the PTAC Annual Symposium. Because of COVID-19 this year, where it's going to be virtual like everything else has been since last March. But we are working on a really great program for you. We're going to have about 25 presenters taking 5 to 10 minutes. And these presenters will have real live business opportunities for your clients and for other small businesses who want to participate. We will get a flyer, a second flyer out here in the next few days, so be looking for that, and which will also include the registration link to be able to register. And at any rate, put those dates on your calendar, again, October 15th, and then our next one on September 24th. And with that, PTAC thanks you for attending and participating today, and we'll see you again soon.